Hello and welcome everybody, also from my side. Last talk of the day, so I have the honor to stand between you and the barbecue and the tombola, if I recall correctly. So I hope you bear with me for additional 30 minutes and some talk about ABAP and APACK, or APACK. Oh, probably not that close to the screen, yeah. Today at SIT-Hot, or formerly known as SIT-BR. Yeah, ABAP, a special snowflake. We already saw some, some coding snippets earlier by Sören. So I simply continue with that now and probably explain a little bit for those of you who haven't heard about ABAP. I think Vitali was it, right? Who said he has never heard about ABAP. What's the interesting things about this nice programming language, which is now there since over 30 years now, and which has made some considerable evolution over the recent years. However, though there has been this revolution or evolution, there are still some issues in the background which makes which makes development in some cases really hard, especially if you know other, let's say, up-to-date programming languages such as. Okay. Anyway, is it me?
Ist noch ein Handy in der Tasche oder so? Vielleicht, ich habe keine Ahnung. That's the ghost of SAP.
That's the ghost, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, we give it a try. Hopefully it's not that disturbing. You need to have an in-system development. There's hardly a possibility to have a local deployment or development, though you have a local developer edition installed, but then it's still a system, an own system, which you need in order to get ready for development. The system applies these two object states with active and inactive, and everything is system central. This version control is proprietary. For those of you who have worked with ABAP or who even needed to transition from Java, JavaScript, C++, and so on to ABAP, or need to work on both things, know that things are special. In this special snowflake, there have been a discussion over several months. I think it started last year with a blog post on the SAP community, where even Hasso Plattner himself replied. So it's a very, very interesting thing. But there are certainly some things probably to the rescue. For example, abapGit, who was created initially by a very, very prominent community member, Lars van Petersen. If you are watching, listening, thanks again. A community-driven version control system for ABAP based on Git. Yeah? So you can basically serialize your ABAP objects, many development objects, not only classes and interfaces, to Git, version them there, share them, vote on them, etc. pp. And the nice thing is this abapGit has been adopted on SAP Cloud Platform with the new version of ABAP, the new iteration of ABAP called Steampunk. Yeah, or not officially called Steampunk, but everybody calls it like that. Harald Cook also recently wrote a nice blog post about the one-year history, so definitely give it a try. Read it if you haven't done so. Yeah, and for this Steampunk we have a certain state of the art, though it's now there for 1 year. Still some things are probably missing, right? So you can import your custom code via abapGit. You can transport your development artifacts from one instance to another using GCTS. But when it comes to development, it might be a little bit restricted in comparison to what you are used to if you have a local system running or your normal system in your company. Yeah? custom code can only use whitelisted objects. It's pretty nice, just because, yeah, well, we can guarantee then if you upgrade to a newer version, everything still runs. So it's kind of an API contract, but this whitelist is still very restricted. Yeah. Other programming languages also started with a very small set of, let's say, functionality. Who of you have been here for Java 1.0 in mid-90s? Somebody? Nobody? Yeah? Some of them, yeah, right? It has evolved quite considerably and also included many, many new features to the class library itself, but also it nurtured a big, big ecosystem over time, right? Just because it was not that hard to create own libraries, to extend the basic functionality. And that's the same thing, and also other examples are there as well, JavaScript, for instance. And the same thing now needs also to happen for ABAP. As we opened up ABAP to work in the cloud, as we opened up ABAP, especially for reuse library or let's say custom code exchange. Previously it was only a community project, now it has been officially endorsed, so we need to do something. However, for example, if you want to adopt existing reuse functionality from not whitelisted sources, so you create a library, create a nice application, and now you want to enable others to use it as well. The open source spirit, basically. But if somebody else wants to use a library, there's nothing, or there has been nothing where you can reference this library, right? You needed to write into a README, okay, this tiny little new library really uses the foundation library by this other guy. Please install it before you install my software manually. Before you need to activate everything, highly cumbersome, highly error prone. That's certainly nothing you want to do, right? Especially when you know things like NPM, if you know things like Maven, if you know things, I can also, of course, list all the other fancy package and dependency managers in the wild. We need to do something. And this discussion has been there that we need something like that for also quite a while. This tiny little GitHub issue has been there since May 2016, and the discussion most certainly has been there for much longer time. And I listed a little bit the requirements which the community mentioned there. So you need to be able to deploy projects without, with all dependencies, not without the dependencies as it is right now. You need to support forks. It needs to support an offline zip use. And very, very important, especially for a company internal use case and also for, let's say, distributed development, is that we need some kind of a repository where all the things are stored, which can be mirrored and which can also be controlled. For example, if you need a subset in your company internal environment, because it's not everywhere like, okay, when IT says, okay, just use everything what you want in the open world, just import it, compile it, let it run. No. Yeah? So things are evaluated before you can use it. For Nexus, for Maven, we have a company internal Nexus, for example, where only the, let's say, endorsed libraries are there. And the same thing needs to happen as well for ABAP, because you might want to execute a certain control over the functionality which you're importing. And the questions are with that, okay, can we use something which is already there? For example, the package interface. Yeah? But what with the system local naming of the other packages, especially if you know abapGit doesn't enforce you to use a certain package name. You can define your own package name when you import a certain ABAP package. That might not really work. How to use, or if to use versioning. You know, within one ABAP system, within one environment, you only have one single version of a certain software entity. In Java or others, you can say, okay, for this project, I use 1.0 of library X. And in the other, you can say, okay, use 1.5, 2.0 of library X, no problem. And you can execute both in its own tiny little runtime environment. Yeah, won't probably work in ABAP. And the last thing is, okay, as we have abapGit, is this dependency feature necessarily needed to be included in abapGit, or can it be an independent project or something in between? Of course, Lars and colleagues were not doing nothing. Of course, they already reacted, especially Lars reacts pretty strongly when it comes to new and exciting requirements and solutions especially. And what we have right now as in abapGit is dependencies to software components and releases. For example, if you have developed something which requires ABAP functionality from higher releases, I mentioned before, you have quite considerable evolution in the last years. So for example, if you use inline declarations or simply new classes which are only there in higher releases, you can already do it like that. But that's of course very coarse-grained, right? So you want to control it on a much more fine-grained way, especially if you want to use only tiny little libraries, as for example, as I said, in NPM, Maven, and so on and so on. Drink, right? Very important. And as a solution, we have now something, at least in an initial version, called APACK. Yeah. So this solution is already called like that. It's a package and dependency manager for ABAP. Right now, focused on ABAP Steampunk. So for the cloud use case, in theory, it can also be ported to the on-premise version of abapGit, of course. However, of course, as I'm currently the only developer, I'm also doing it as a side project in my, let's say, 80, 90, 95, or even more % life within SAP. I'm an architect and have this as my pet project, so to say. You of course need to focus, yeah. And this focus is, of course, especially in the area where it's most beneficial, and that's the cloud. Yeah, this APACK is independent of the ABAP package concept, so we don't need to use this, in my opinion, weak but quite complex package concept, especially when it comes to the characteristics of abapGit, where we have not a very precise naming of the packages. Instead, we simply reuse something which many of you already know, as an identifier of packages and dependency declaration. That's a group ID, artifact ID, and a version. Yeah? If you use Maven, you pretty much know it. We also had some additional ideas, some different ideas, but in the end, we thought, especially also in cooperation with Lars, that's probably what people know best, and we simply use it. And with that now, it's possible to, if a package has declared its group ID, artifact ID, and probably version, other can reference your work without any problems, yeah, with a unique ID. It can be automatically interpreted by the system, by external clients, and based on that, with this tiny little declaration, you can basically build up a whole ecosystem of reused libraries and applications. Yeah? And the nice thing, it's fully compatible with abapGit. So, of course, it can be integrated in other solutions as well, if you want to do it, if you want to develop it. Right now, it's seamlessly integrated. Simply use it if you use abapGit. Yeah, and the background of this decision was basically, that the Steampunk whitelist might not grow fast enough. Of course, it grows considerably over time, but in parallel, right? It's not always black and white. In parallel, we simply need to allow and nurture the open source ecosystem, which is already there, by the way. If you don't know it yet and you're using a standard ABAP system and want to check out what is already, let's say, available as open source, go to .abap.org. Really, really nice. Some funny projects, some really usable projects, and probably we see much more for Steampunk there as well. And I mentioned that it's currently Steampunk only. The integration in abapGit plugin for ADT is done. And the export is currently on-premise only, as we don't have a push from a Steampunk instance to GitHub or any Git provider yet. Probably, disclaimer, we see something in the near future. But that's right now the scenario, right? You export your software from an on-premise system and import it to in Steampunk, and then you're done. Of course, we will see extensions in the future, but again, no promises about what's currently there, right? Or what's in the pipeline. And that's also the case for the versioning, of course. Yeah, I mentioned it previously, briefly. It's a very tough challenge to introduce versioning within a single ABAP instance, and that's probably something we need to tackle a little later. Yeah, and now you question yourself, how is it working, right? Talking about the details, group ID, artifact ID, stuff. So now we become a little bit more precise about the declaration, yeah, and that's done with the so-called APAC Manifest. And here we have a concrete screenshot of an ABAP implementation. We have a marker interface called ABAP Manifest. That's the one for the Steampunk instance once we get a push. If you do the push from your system on an on-premise system, if you deploy the abapGit version from the community version, you have the ABAP Manifest. Here in this example, it's already the new one with ABAP Manifest. And it's very simple. Only if you have a project, reuse library, something like that, only one single class in your project needs to implement this marker interface, period. And the implementation of this marker interface actually doesn't contain that much coding. It's just to fill an internal structure, an attribute called descriptor with the variables, not the variables, with the values which I mentioned before. So the group ID, artifact ID, version, and that's also interesting because we don't have a central repository right now, a Git URL. That's basically the URL where which is the home of this project, and where, if you have dependencies, it can be retrieved in the end. It's also the same here if you have a dependency. So this artifact JAK is now referencing as dependency this ABAP platform Y. Without that, it wouldn't run. So previously, you would have had a README. Okay, before you deploy JAK, please deploy Y first, activate everything, and then continue. So that's basically what's stated here in this tiny little thing. So nothing more. So now why a marker interface with attributes or with a single attribute? Well, in ABAP, you don't have single file support. Yeah? Under normal circumstances, you would simply have a YAML, JSON, or for the older guys like me, probably an XML. And that's simply not possible in ABAP, right? So you need to have another solution. And the solution is that everything is in the class, which has the advantage that if you deploy it in a system, you can also automatically evaluate the contents with standard means in an ABAP system. So you don't need to install additional software. You don't need to install additional things in order to evaluate all this information. Everything is there. And when it comes to serialization, so to push it to an external service like GitHub, then of course this class implementation is converted itself, of course. But as we have this marker interface implemented, an APAC Manifest XML file is automatically created as well on top level of the respective project. And that's what we see here. So if we have an implementation, you see this .apacmanifest.xml. And here in the serialized XML, the same way as you also know in abapGit, yeah, you have all this information structured, group ID, artifact ID, version, and so on and so on. And the dependencies clearly listed there as well. So that's the declaration side. And now, after we have pushed the things to GitHub or to any other provider, another colleague, of course, also wants to import it with all the dependencies. And for that, we use ADT. ABAP development tools, ABAP in Eclipse, and especially the abapGit plugin, which is officially shipped by SAP in order to use it with a Steampunk instance. And if you use, let's say, a more or less up-to-date version, it was included, I think, 3, 4, 5 months ago, the APAC Manifest is automatically detected, and the dependencies, the declaration, and everything is automatically evaluated and, of course, also interpreted. And if we have a dependency which you also need to resolve, as we have here in this example, you remember, JAK requires double Y. You get an additional view in the wizard to also import this dependency automatically. Provide a local package, and if you press next, select your transport request, you're done automatically with all the dependencies. And of course, it does not only include the direct dependencies, but also the transitive ones, right? So if you have a dependency to a dependency, and so on and so on and so on, yeah, the complete tree is traversed, included, and listed there as well. Yeah. And yeah, so much for the theory, probably. Let's have a look how it looks like in the end. So that's a standard ADT, right? And here on GitHub, it's actually the official SAP project, right? There you have the sample which I was talking about the last 20 minutes. 20 minutes, yeah. And you simply can use it here. So copy this, this URL and use this abapGit repository view to link it with your system. And now have a look at the status line below. When I press next, it automatically, as I said, as promised, it automatically evaluates the dependencies and shows then in the next step of the view the respective dependencies. So let's have a look. You see, checking APAC Manifest. That's still the standard one, which you know. I need to provide the standard package for the main one, right? And now if I press next, I get all the dependencies. Yeah? So you see here, JAK requires double Y. And if we go back here to this project, we check out this .apac manifest.xml, and that's exactly the dependency which you've seen before in the screenshot. And now I also, of course, prepared a little bit for the sake of time. I need to provide the package name for the dependency. Press next. We select the transport request, and now we are done, right? So it's one, let's say, one single wizard instead of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wizards, depending if you have or how many dependencies you have. Much more convenient than before. And of course, also if you pull a newer version of this particular JK. So remember, if I contribute an update for this project, also the dependencies are evaluated and all the dependent packages can be updated as well. So let's pull, and you see here as well, the package dependency resolution also kicks in for updates. Yeah, and that's basically it for the very small demo. As said, each and every single project which is serialized to abapGit can use APAC if it's just for declaration. So if you don't have any dependencies, just use it yourself. If you have own dependencies, probably you really want to use it just because it's much more convenient for your users. And yeah, small impact in the end, right? Just a single class, but probably a nice tiny little step towards a much more state-of-the-art developer experience for ABAP and open source. I hope it's easy to use. It has a direct integration to abapGit, so for those of you who are familiar either with exporting to abapGit in the backend system already, or who use a Steampunk system, can directly use it. And of course, it can be easily extended. Yeah, so it's completely open source, and you can already now start, if you want to use it in a central repository, just do it, right? Nobody prevents you from doing that. Probably we will do something as well, but it might take time. Also version dependencies, though I can disclose a little bit because I already committed some of them that might come in the near future. Also, when it comes to on-premise ABAP releases, probably the interest is high, but in this case, I can say no promises so far. No matter if you contribute via code, simply replies to commits or questions, other comments, whatsoever, everything is welcome. Yeah? So it's, as I said, a small project. I really try to assist and help the ABAP people in the wild with that. And I simply want you to have fun. Yeah? So I hope that will work for you. In this case, the only thing which I need to tell you about, probably you can contact me, sebastian.wolf@sap.com. I'm on Twitter, GitHub. That's one of my few accounts there. And of course, APACK is also featured on blogs.sap.com with a little bit more details. So looking forward to hearing from you, either now with questions or later at the barbecue or via email or something. So